Hello, listeners. Welcome back to the Formula Podcast, where we have conversations about what a life of substance and intention look like. I'm the producer, Jeremy, filling in for Trevor Carlson on the introduction of this episode with Aaron Horn. This is a heavy episode with great insights from Aaron about one of life's most difficult moments. Tread lightly from here on out.
Sitting down with my friend today, Aaron Horn. I don't even know where to start to introduce all the different stuff that you do or the titles that you have. Do you want to start going down the list and let us know what the extraordinary Aaron Horn does?
Well, I stay busy, that's for sure. So my full-time gig, I'm the chief operating officer for a nonprofit in Cedar Rapids called the New Bohemian Innovation Collaborative, or NewBoCo for short. It's a lot of words. Yep. And we started as the Iowa Startup Accelerator, and then we added so many other programs it didn't make sense to just be called the Iowa Startup Accelerator anymore. So we focus on entrepreneurship programs, tech education programs, and corporate innovation programs. So everything that we do, which is probably 30 plus different things, all fall within those major categories. So that's my full-time gig. I've been a long-time IT person. This is actually the first job I've ever had that wasn't being the head of IT for some company. So I've been in several different industries, started up in ag manufacturing, and then I moved to healthcare software, and then I moved to the railroad. And all of that was before coming here to NewBoCo. And then, my side, quote unquote, side projects would include Beat Cancer Today, which is a nonprofit that we started 10 years ago now. And I'm on the board for Miracle Travel Works, based out of Des Moines, that helps families that have to travel long distances in order to get care for their kids. And I'm the chairman of the board for Candlelighters NYC, which is in New York City and helps families that come to New York City to get treatment for their kids.
That's a lot of stuff. I didn't even want to try to to go down the list, but my first question is how do you have time to do all these things?
Well, I don't. And dad of 6 kids too, by the way. So that's another thing that takes up a lot of time. No, the things that I do on the nonprofit side, besides obviously my full-time gig here, are really passion projects, and they all come from being passionate about helping those causes. So to me, it's really it's an honor to be able to do things to help those organizations and what they're doing. And some of them it's really just giving some advice or, serving on the board, things like that. Beat Cancer is probably the one that takes up the most time. But even that, obviously we're just doing that on the weekends, and it's a family affair. So the family loves to help out, and we all can kind of do that together.
And you've been doing the stuff with Beat Cancer for quite some time, it seems like. And you guys have done some awesome work there and raised a lot of money for pediatric cancer research, right? I know some of this story, but I don't know all of it. And I was going to ask you why you got into this, but I think that that's probably your why. So with what happened with Eli, do you want to kind of talk about what happened and how that caused you to get involved with these programs giving back?
Yeah, for sure. So that's really whenever people ask me about Beat Cancer and how'd you get into that, and I'm also kind of known for the fact that I wear all these bracelets on my wrist. Both wrists are covered in these bracelets, and so that usually opens up the question, what's all that about? So back in 2007, my son Eli was 3.5, and he was normal, happy, healthy kid. But then over the course of a week or two, we just started noticing that he was constipated. He was having a hard time with his stomach. He was just not feeling right. And so we would take him into the pediatrician, and they'd look him over and say, oh, yep, he's all backed up. And so, do this, he'll be fine. And so one morning he actually couldn't walk, and I was like, okay, this is a huge problem. So I called the pediatrician. I said, hey, I'm bringing him in. We got to figure something out. He's having a hard time walking. So this is serious. He said, yeah, absolutely, bring him in. So brought him in, did the x-rays again. And then he said, you know what, we're going to do a CT scan. And so they did a CT scan, and then he came in, he said, Aaron, he has a massive tumor, and it's down into his pelvis and up around his aorta, and it's massive. And he's like, you have to get him to the University of Iowa today. So you can either drive right now, or I can get you an ambulance. And I said, well, let's just get in the car and go. So we got in the car, we drove to Iowa City, which we were in Ames. So it was about a 2-hour drive or so. And, we went in, and they had already been called, and they said, we think it's something called neuroblastoma, but we're going to do a biopsy, and we're going to figure it out. And so within a day or two, they'd confirmed it was neuroblastoma, super rare childhood cancer. I think something like 600 kids a year get diagnosed with neuroblastoma. It was stage 4, which meant it was in the bone marrow. It was everywhere. And so within, 2 or 3 days, he's starting chemo, and he's, basically getting started on this path. And so, as you do, I guess you start Googling, and we figured out that the kind of the most advanced research in the world for neuroblastoma specifically was being done in New York City at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. And so we called them, talked to them, basically went back and forth a little bit on what's the right course of treatment, and it's basically on you as parents to figure that out. And so you've got one doctor telling you one thing, you've got another doctor telling you another thing. And so we ended up going out there specifically for surgery because, I asked the surgeon in Iowa how many neuroblastoma surgeries he had done, and he's like, I've done, I think, 5 in my career. But, there's, a lot of these cancers, the tumor resections are the same. But the one in New York City did 5 a week. And so, because that's basically what he did, and that's what everybody was going from all around the world for was, for neuroblastoma research and surgery there. So I said, okay, well, no offense, but I'm going to go to New York and have the surgery done there. And then we'll go from there. So we did that. It was a 14.5-hour surgery, and he was literally peeling off millimeter by millimeter, like this tumor from all around the, renal arteries and the aorta, and is a big deal. So it took a while for him to recover from that. And while we were there, they said, hey, why don't we go ahead and as he's recovering, let's just hit him with another round of chemo. So we did that. And then when we came back, he was having some side effects from that chemo, and the doctors in Iowa were pretty upset about how much they had given him. It was off of their protocol. It wasn't what they would have done, and all that. So essentially they said, look, you need to make a decision. Are you going to get treatment in Iowa, or are you going to get treatment in New York? You can't really do this whole back and forth thing. And so we're like, okay, well, I guess we're going to New York. So we packed up, I think the week after Thanksgiving, drove out to New York City, and we were there for 1 year straight. We had a 2-week-old baby at the time. So Eli's little brother, Isaiah, with us, and he basically grew up his first year in the Ronald McDonald House in New York City. After 1 year of treatment, basically something called 3F8, which was an antibody treatment that they were doing for Eli, it had cleared up all of his neuroblastoma. So his scans were clean. We were going basically back and forth then at that point from Iowa to New York for treatment. So he would just get that treatment done just in case there was something microscopic they couldn't detect, excuse me, on the scans. And we did that for quite a while. And then there were, over the course of several years, there were setbacks with, found a new spot on his brain, had to have brain surgery. There was problems with his gut, so he had to have surgery in his stomach and, all these different things. But for the most part, he could go to school in Iowa, and then we'd just take off for a week or something in New York whenever he needed to have scans or treatment or whatever. We did that for quite a while. And then one of the just normal blood work that they did in Des Moines, because we were able to go to Des Moines and even in Ames to do just regular blood work, they were concerned about. So they sent it off to Mayo Clinic, and Mayo Clinic said, this is a concern. And it turned out that all of the chemo and radiation had ended up causing leukemia. And so that's one of the risks that they tell you about when they're going to, they say, hey, we're going to give you a bunch of chemo, and ironically, it could cause cancer. And so that's what happened. And so he had AML. The only solution for AML was a transplant. And so since he had had all of his primary care in New York, we went back out to New York City for the transplant. And then he didn't make it through the transplant process. So he passed away in January of 2012, right before he would have turned 8. So that was our, journey. And in that process, so in 2009, we had kind of gotten together with several other families that really wanted to give back to the organizations that had supported us as families going through this fight. And specifically, that was the University of Iowa Dance Marathon, Children's Cancer Connection, and the research that is being done specifically for childhood cancer is done out of Philadelphia with a group called the Children's Oncology Group Foundation. And so there are hundreds of hospitals around the world that subscribe to COG protocols. And so, if there's research being done for childhood cancer, it's being done at COG, and then it's being pushed out to all these hospitals to say, hey, this is, if you get a stage 4 neuroblastoma, high risk, MIC amplified, age, whatever, this is the protocol you should use. And that all comes out of COG. And so, obviously for us as parents, research was a really big deal. And the amount of research funding that's out there is super, super low. So, for example, the National Cancer Institute gives 4% of their federal funding towards childhood cancer research specifically. And obviously, as parents, we're like, that's not enough. So we support those 3 organizations, and the idea was just, in Iowa, we don't have any professional sports teams, so everybody's crazy about the Cyclones or the Hawkeyes or the Panthers, right? And so there were 2 moms sitting by the pool, and one of them saw someone walk by with a Beat State shirt on, and then like 20 minutes later, somebody walked by with a shirt that said Beat Iowa, and she said, wouldn't it be cool if everybody was just behind Beat Cancer? And that comment kind of sparked this idea of, we could do t-shirts that just say Beat Cancer, that are in black and gold and cardinal and gold. And we could do that as kind of an awareness and a fundraiser for these organizations that have supported us. And so in 2009, we started that, and they were wildly successful, super simple. I think that's what people love about them. They just say Beat Cancer, and they have the Tiger Hawk logo on them, or they have the Iowa State logo on them. And so it was super popular, and we started doing, high schools and middle schools and things like that, because there were kids at these schools that were being diagnosed, and the community wanted to support them, and this was a really cool way for them to be able to do that. And so in 2012, we became an official 501c3. We got Beat Cancer with the gold ribbon trademarked, and we've just been continuing to do corporate t-shirts and high schools, middle schools, like we've always done, and then we do a big fundraiser every year with a silent auction, and we bring in doctors and kids and all these people to speak about what these organizations mean to them, and we raise a lot of money for that. And then the last thing we added last year were scholarships. So obviously dealing with childhood cancer is a real financial burden for families. And so we wanted to offer some scholarships for both the survivors and siblings of kids that had fought cancer, so that if they wanted to go on to college or just secondary education after high school, that we could offer them a little bit of help with that. So we have $2,500 scholarships for them. And then for low-income families, we also have some $5,000 scholarships to help them with their college expenses. So that's the very long story of kind of how we got into it, why, and what we do.
Oh, thanks for sharing. I feel like I've heard roughly like tiny parts of that story over the years, because we've known each other for probably like 6 or 7 years at this point. Too long. As I'm listening to your story, I'm like, one of the questions that comes to mind is, what changed for you, and like how did that change like your perception just in general? I'm so curious, like what if before all this happened you were the same Aaron Horn that I know now, and what, I don't know, man. I guess I'm just curious, like what went through your head, and how did that really change how you looked at your like day-to-day life, and just like how did it change your perspective in general?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think maybe 2 things. One, from a faith perspective, I think, being a Christian, one of the things that I guess I grew up in a Christian home, and so I was always around, church and things like that. And so from that perspective, I basically could fall back on my faith of like, okay, I don't know why this is happening, but I believe that, God has a purpose, or God has a reason, or at least that God has it under control. And I also knew enough to say, to try and really be honest with God when I was praying, to say, I'm not just gonna tell you that I know why all this is happening and that it's all going to happen for good and all that. You know very, very well that I want Eli to be healed and that I want Eli to be okay. And that I think we can go on to do some amazing things when Eli beats this thing. And what a great story to tell, right? That's my version of how this should go. And, fast forward several years later, that's not how it went. But I always could fall back on just understanding that I really did believe that God would use this situation in some way for the positive. And one of the things that I started doing with the faith that would be true is I started blogging everything for a couple reasons. One, just to help. There were so many people that wanted to know how Eli was doing and what was going on and all of that. It was really hard to keep up with informing everybody. And so I created this blog so that people could follow along and know how to pray for him and what he was going through and all of that. But also, when Eli was first diagnosed, I went out and tried to find stories and tried to find people who are fighting the same type of cancer and for ideas and what to do and that sort of thing. And I came across a few blogs where parents were talking about Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, and we tried this and we tried that, and it was very helpful. So there was a practical piece of it, and then also just the wanting to let people know what was going on. And so that part was always true for me, that I did at the end of the day believe that God would use the situation and that something good would come out of it. And so I've continued to just ask God, how have you impacted others through Eli's story? And I've just always been blown away by how out of the blue, randomly, someone will message me and say, I just want you to know that I never said anything, but for 5 years, I followed your story and I continue to follow you on Facebook or whatever now. And I've never told anyone this before, but this is how what I saw as you and Eli and your family was going through that, how it changed me and impacted me. Even specifically, one guy talked about his relationship with his son, and he's like, I just realized I wasn't being a good father to my son, and it really helped strengthen our relationship, and just things like that. And it would blow me away. And to me, that was God answering that simple prayer of, let me show you how what Eli went through made an impact for other people. And so I've met tons of people at the Ronald McDonald House, for example, in New York City, from all different walks of faith. And it was interesting to me to see there would be people who they weren't quote unquote religious before, but after their child gets diagnosed with cancer, all of a sudden they are. There were people who were already religious, and this just helped strengthen their faith. There were people who they were religious before, but when something like this happened, they just don't understand how a loving God could let something like this happen, and so they fall away. And so, all just the whole gamut. And it was really interesting to be able to just talk to people and, respect and understand their perspectives. And then even from a case of, when a child passes away, there's a lot of different ways that people handle that situation. So some people just want absolutely nothing to do with the world of childhood cancer ever again because it brings too much pain and hurt. And then there are people who, really want to continue on the fight and raise money for research and try to make sure that this doesn't happen to more kids and things like that. And I've learned that all of those reactions are okay and they're legitimate, and that there's not one right way to handle the situation. From the perspective piece, I'd say the biggest thing that I learned is don't sweat the small stuff. It's not that big of a deal. Like today, it blows me away how much people get worked up over the littlest things. Like the littlest things, get people so, they're just so dramatic. And I just think it is not that big of a deal. And even from all the things that we've gone through, I can, off the top of my head, think of at least 8 to 10 families that have it so much worse than we did. And I know you're like, what do you mean? Like, your kid died. How much worse can it get? I've seen kids suffer, like really truly suffer for so long, and their parents like taking care of them in hospice at their home, watching their kid just get worse and worse and worse before passing away. And to me, is so much worse than the situation in which Eli actually just passed away in the night. That's literally, I woke up at 6 a.m. and his bed was surrounded by doctors and nurses that were trying to revive him. And he had just slipped away early in the morning. And so when I think about that, and then I look at all of these other families I know that had to watch their kids really go through it, I think, man, they had it so much worse than I did. And so I think that perspective of it could be so much worse applies to not only me, but to people who are, getting super upset that their kids wore muddy shoes through the kitchen and they lose their minds. Like, really? So I think that was probably the biggest takeaway for me that I still hold to this day, is that it's just not that big of a deal.
The attitude where it's like, instead of dwelling on something, like just something bad that happened and I'm just going to be upset about it, I think it's a really good attitude to have, where it's like, how am I going to use this? Like in the future, like this has to be happening for a reason. And I'm going to, you've chosen to use it to, you've impacted a lot of people's lives. I can't even probably put a number on how many people have been impacted by the work you've done and the work that people you work with have done. And it's funny when you see like people get so worked up about stuff. It's because it's funny to me, like even like I relate a lot of things back to travel because that's just my world right now. And I like, I have like one bag. I don't stay at resorts. That's really not my style. But every once in a while I'll meet up with friends. I'll be like, yeah, I booked this nice place for us. It's actually like a homestay or whatever. And sometimes, their response would be like, dude, come on. Like, oh, I want the, the foot scrubs by the pool, and this one guy I met was talked about this in a previous podcast. He's like, people when they're complaining when they're on the beach because the sand is not soft enough. And he's like, you're on a beach. He's like, just enjoy it. Because I see a common thread with a lot of people I talk to, the ones that seem to have this perspective about like how to not sweat the little things, or how, like what the trying to think of like comparison is, like, oh man, I spilled my coffee, my day is ruined, versus like, something that you went through, or like some of the other guests we've had on. What advice do you have somebody that, to really maybe improve their perspective a bit, or how would you suggest that they maybe learn to not sweat the small stuff?
Yeah, it's tough because you're basically bucking human nature, right? It is definitely normal to just lament when something bad happens to you, or when something isn't going exactly your way. I think we're mostly just selfish people by nature. Like, that's normal. So we think about ourselves all the time, and what's best for us. And so you do have to kind of actively, I would say, just actively think when something bad happens, it could be worse. It's super simple, but it's very true. And you don't have to go to the extreme of, well, this could happen or that could happen or whatever, but just a simple little, it could be worse. Someone cuts you off in traffic. We didn't wreck. It could be worse, as opposed to just immediately, jumping to the woe is me, I guess, piece of it. So, and it takes practice, I think. I think you have to actively think about it. You can't just expect it to happen. You can't just expect to one day wake up and realize that things could be worse and I really have it pretty good and things like that. And frankly, bad things happen to people. Like, there will be things that happen to you that are not cool. And it is definitely not going to be your first response of, oh, it could be worse, But I think with practice and, with thinking about that purposefully, I think you can get better about not just thinking that the sky is falling every time every little bad thing happens to you.
As you were talking, I was thinking of this quote from one of my favorite books. It's The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. There's a point in time where I think, I don't remember what happens. The main character, like Santiago, I think all of his money gets stolen. And he's like, he basically has a choice to make. He's like, okay, he's kind of complaining. He's upset because he has no money and he's in like a foreign country. And he has a choice between being like an upset traveler who was just robbed and like being like, oh man, I have the worst luck. This is terrible. Or to look at it as like, I'm an adventurer in search of treasure. And, this is just part of the path that I'm on. So like when I'm hearing you talk about a lot of this stuff, it's like with the stuff that happened with Eli, it's almost as if your perspective was like, I'm going to make this bigger than just this. I'm going to my purpose is more than, to be like grieving or to be like questioning why this is happening. Would you say that's kind of accurate?
What's the quote? It's better to have loved and lost than to have never loved at all, right? So, when I think about, well, I guess the alternative could have been that I just never had Eli, for example, and then I never would have had to have gone through that pain. I never would have had to have felt that, but no way. Like he was such an incredible kid, and he was so funny and sarcastic and loving and smart, and so every minute that I got with him was well worth it. Like he taught me so much in life. Do I wish he was still here today? 100%, of course, absolutely. But would I have wished to never have had him so that I didn't have to feel that pain of that loss? No, definitely not. And so again, I think that's perspective too. Maybe not everybody feels that way, but I think they would. One of the things that, if you look at the pediatric cancer world, and especially around fundraising and foundations that start, you're going to notice that a lot of them have a kid's name attached. I've never done that because, we have the whole Beat Cancer thing, and I've kind of poured all my passion into that. But the reason for that, and I think it's 110% legit, that people create these foundations with their kid's name, but I'll tell you why they do it is because they are so afraid that their kid will be forgotten. It is a crippling fear that your kid, people will forget that your kid ever existed. And one of the things that exacerbates that problem is that a lot of times people won't talk about your kid in front of you if your kid has passed away because they're afraid. I guess maybe they're thinking they're going to make you sad, which I totally get. That makes sense. But you're not going to remind a parent that their child passed away, right? That is something that they're dealing with every single day. What you are doing when you talk about their kid is that you're showing them that you remember them and that you had great memories of them. I legitimately do feel somewhat bad for people who never got to meet Eli because he was so funny. And I think that people who did get to meet him, I think they feel extra, I guess, blessed by the fact that they knew him and they got to interact with him and they got to see how, fun he was. And so for me, it's, especially when those people who knew Eli and actually got to hang out with him and meet him, talk about him, I love hearing that. And I love hearing stories from people that maybe they think I already know, but like, hey, remember that time? And sometimes I don't remember that time. And so I love hearing stories about Eli. And so that's why a lot of these nonprofits and these organizations exist with the kid's name on it, because the parents are just wanting to make sure that legacy lives on.
I want to ask like two questions. I might cry when you answer them, but so first one, what do you think that the biggest lesson you learned from Eli was?
Biggest life lesson from Eli, I would say, truly the thing that we talked about as far as not sweating the small stuff, that definitely came out of that situation. Is certainly the biggest thing I think I've learned in life, is that it's not worth getting all worked up over the little things. My wife and I were literally just joking about that last night, about all these stressful things that are going on, and we're just like, whatever. And she even said last night, she's like, do you realize that most people would not be blowing off these stressful things that we're seeing right now, and because it's all perspective. So that, I think that was big. And then the other huge thing I think I learned from that whole situation and from Eli is, well, first of all, from Eli, he really just took things as they came and really didn't question them. One time he asked me, why is this happening to me? Or why did this happen to me? And so, I mean, it knocked me off my feet. I really didn't even know, how do I answer that to, I think he was like 6 or maybe 7 at the time. Like, how do I even answer that? And so I said, buddy, I don't really know the best answer for that. Except that, I really think that God knew that you were strong and that you would fight this, and that a lot of people would see what you did and would be inspired by you. And I think a lot of people will come to know God better because of the fight that you're fighting and how strong you are. And to him, that was a perfectly good answer. He just kind of nodded his head and, yeah, sounds right. And so he just took everything as it came. One time when we had to tell him that, after feeling quote unquote normal and having beat neuroblastoma, we had to tell him that a new type of cancer had come back. He just kind of quietly pondered it. And then he looked up and he said, I'm ready to fight. And that blew me away because he never really talked like that, but I could tell that came from his heart, and that he knew what was coming ahead, that it was more medicine, it was more crap time in the hospital, it was going to stink, but that he had done it before and that he'll just do it again. And so that level of strength and that, just resilience is probably one of the most inspiring things that I've ever seen. I didn't mention this before, but the 3F8 treatment that he went through, it was essentially you take a bunch of medicine to build up your white blood cell count. And then this medicine actually highlights the neuroblastoma cells, because obviously your body doesn't recognize that it's got bad cancer cells growing, and so it just lets it happen. Well, the 3F8 highlights the neuroblastoma so that your own body says, oh, that's bad, and attacks. And so you beef up your white blood cells, so there's tons of white blood cells in your body, and then they all go attack the neuroblastoma that's being highlighted by this 3F8 marker. The only side effect, the only long-term side effect, or I guess there are no long-term side effects, but the only short-term side effect is that it also highlights your nerve endings. And so it is the most excruciating, most painful, probably 3 hours. It goes over the course of 3 hours every single day for 5 straight days. And it's kind of horrifying, but the 9th floor of Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center is full of kids getting 3F8, screaming down the hallways in pain. Like it's incredible. The parents are crying because they're watching their kids go through this insane amount of pain. And so they would do that, and you can't knock them out for it. Like you can try and give them drugs to help with the pain as much as possible, but it's still excruciating. And then they'd have like an hour of just kind of recovery, whatever. And then you'd put them in a stroller and kind of wheel them back to the Ronald McDonald House, and maybe they'd rest a little bit. And then by 7 or 8 o'clock at night, these kids are running around, playing, having a great time with their buddies at the Ronald McDonald House. And then the next morning, they get in their stroller knowing that they're going to go into another day of 3F8. And they know that that's what they need to do. They know it's going to be super painful, but they don't refuse to do it. The resilience and the strength that they have to say, okay, this is what I need to, this is what my parents and my doctors are telling me I need to do to beat this thing. Let's do it. And so that kind of strength is insanely inspiring.
Yeah, I can't even imagine. That just sounds like I can't even imagine walking down that floor, or imagine like having your nerve endings attacked by your white blood cells. That sounds intense. So second question, because we've talked a lot about, like cancer and that sort of thing. When you think of like your best memory of Eli, what comes to mind?
Oh man, that's so hard to even just pick one. So I mentioned how funny and sarcastic he was. Always loved playing playing pranks on nurses and things like that, he would like fill syringes with water, and then hide them in his bed. And then when the nurse would come, he would like squirt them, with a syringe full of water to take them by surprise. He would, the funniest story, I think, from Eli was we were at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center in a inpatient room, and we were sharing it with someone else. And there was a curtain that was drawn. And so, just to give privacy to both sides of the room. And Eli let out the biggest fart ever. So loud. And he immediately looked at me with his eyes wide, and he smiled, and he goes, "Dad!" He's totally blaming it on me for the sake of the people that were on the other side of the curtain, and everybody was just dying laughing. But like, that was his humor. That was, even when he's sitting in a hospital bed, going through treatment, he still had such a great sense of humor. And he also, I never talked down to him or tried to baby things or sugarcoat things or, things like that. So the nurses and the doctors were always blown away by the level that he was engaged in his treatment, and like even just using the right phrases and the proper names for the medicine, and just asking questions. And so so in turn they would answer his questions very honestly and medically, and not try to water it down for him. And so it was really fun just to see him interact with other people and just see people's reactions when they're talking to, a 6 or 7-year-old, but who's a little man, and asking really smart questions, and is really, engaged with the doctors. And so, just his intelligence and he definitely got my sarcasm. So he was very sarcastic and very funny. And so, those are the things that, even to this day, I really miss. And so, I've obviously got lots of kids, and they are all amazing. And even when I start to see some of those things that remind me of Eli come out of some of the little boys too, as far as, making funny jokes or being sarcastic, it just makes me think back and like, yep, that's Eli. I remember how sarcastic he was. And, so those are some of my favorite memories of him.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure and ask that, because I feel like a lot of the focus gets put onto the struggle and the other parts. So I'm sure there's a lot of good memories that go there too. Now, I know there's a lot of people out there, like myself included. A lot of people go through like tough shit in life, and sometimes things can look a little bleak or be frustrating. What advice do you have for people that are out there that could be going through a rough patch, or maybe there's a rough patch coming? What do you tell them about getting through stuff like this? Or just, well, not specifically your situation, because maybe it's not on that level, or it's different, but what advice do you have for them?
Like I said, I think it's hard for someone who's going through something very painful to just immediately say, well, it could be worse. Like, because at the time it doesn't feel that way, right? And, maybe not even just talking about small stuff, but even like really big stuff, like people who are really sick, or people who have been diagnosed with cancer, or, people who have lost their loved one, that is a big deal. And so, I think for, it really just depends on a person's situation, and what they have as far as like a community or a group of friends. One thing I would say is that just if you have anyone that you can kind of confide in and talk to about the real crap that comes along with bad things that happen, that if you have someone that you can do that with, to not just keep it all in, and to actually share with someone that you can trust. Because, I think the tendency is like, oh no, it's fine. Like, oh, we'll make through it, I'll get through it, whatever. And there's just a lot of stuff that you need to talk to somebody about. And so, I think we were super blessed to have such a great like church community, for example, that really kind of rallied behind us, but not everybody has that either. And so, basically finding someone that you can you can confide in and talk to. And honestly, if there is nobody in your life that applies to, I'm a real believer in being able to go talk to a therapist or, somebody, because I know how your own brain can just twist things over and over and over again, and you can just kind of go down this bad path of just thinking on your own without talking out loud to somebody else and getting another perspective. So I'd say that's kind of the biggest thing, is find somebody that you can confide in and talk to, that can help you just even talk out loud and be able to share honestly what your fears are and what you're going through, and that can kind of, even if they don't have the perfect thing to say, which, by the way, when you're talking to someone and they've lost their child, or you're talking to someone and they lost a parent, or there's really nothing you're going to be able to say to really comfort them. And I think that's where people struggle and get really, really awkward. But maybe they just need you to listen. Maybe they just need you to be there. Maybe they just need you to bring them over a meal or something and just be there with them so they know they're not alone. Maybe that's all you need to do. And you don't need to work yourself up about finding the very perfect thing to say, in a situation where there is no perfect thing to say. And so from the friend perspective, I think just being there for people that are going through a really hard time and listening is huge. And for the people going through the hard time, finding someone that you can confide in and talk to is a really big deal.
Yeah, I think that's excellent advice. Just sometimes it's just being there for someone. I mean, there's some health issues going on with my grandpa right now, and I think that my aunts and uncles all flew in to kind of help out with my grandma, and I think the fact that they're just there is more helpful than anything else. So you do a lot of, I mean, you give back a ton, like your time, financially. I mean, I'm trying to think of any other way you would give back, but I think those are like the main two. How do you recommend, like, so let's say people are listening to this, like, man, Aaron does a lot of stuff. He's contributed a lot to like Beat Cancer and to some of these other organizations. How do I get involved in giving back and contributing to a cause that I care about?
Yeah, first of all, I think you nailed it with the that I care about. That when people ask me like, oh, how do you spend all this time, working with these different nonprofits and all of that? And even to the one that I work with, full time at NuboCo, working with entrepreneurs, it's because I love it and it's one of my passions. And so when you're looking at how could I give back or what could I do, think about the things that you're passionate about and that you care about. Do you love animals? Then, work with an animal rescue league or something. And, I think there's plenty of opportunities that you can search out, volunteer opportunities, even just online. So for Beat Cancer, for example, we use a service called volunteermatch.com. And I can put out there, and I just did this, where I put out, hey, I would like someone, I have access to a grant database that's full of grants that I could apply for funding for Beat Cancer. I have no time to do any of that. And I think it would be really beneficial. I think if we were applying for some of these grants, that we would actually get some of them and we could do even more things. It would be awesome. I don't have time to go through there. So I went on volunteermatch.com and I put on a post for looking for a volunteer grant writer. It pays nothing. You will dig through available grants, figure out which ones might be very applicable to pediatric cancer awareness and research and family support programs. And you will write the grant and apply for it. And that's your job. It'll take maybe a couple hours a month of just doing some research and writing up a grant or something like that. And I had like 3 or 4 applications. I'm like, why didn't I think of this before? So there are people actively on volunteermatch.com looking for opportunities to volunteer in things that they're passionate about. And so again, it doesn't have to be pediatric cancer related necessarily, but just whatever you're passionate about. And I think also people think, well, I don't have all that time to dedicate. There are literally volunteer opportunities that you can do remotely. And there are volunteer opportunities that would only take an hour a week or an hour a month or however much time that you have that you want to do something. And I think you'll be, really just inspired by the work that's being done that you can kind of help contribute to in a little way. And I'm guessing it will probably suck you in deeper and deeper so that you'll want to do more and more.
So a question I get all the time, or I don't even know if it's a question, but people share with me, like, I don't know what my purpose is. I don't know what my passion is. I don't know what I want to do. And I mean, I'm in the same boat half the time. I think a lot of us are questioning what our next steps are and whatnot. There was something I read at one point in time. I can't remember the book, but it said something like, I think it was Man's Search for Meaning, actually. If you don't know what your meaning is, it's just like, go out and volunteer. Like, go out and do something for somebody else. So I kind of think that that's like the key to finding your meaning or your purpose or whatever you want to do. Like, it's just going out and contributing to something, even if, like you said, it's for an hour a month, because I think there's no other feeling in the world. Like, I remember when I can't remember if you probably were there. We did the cleanup for the caregivers and whatnot. Like, dude, I would do that every weekend, you know? Like, I felt, I loved being able to do something to help out these families taking care of people with different illnesses. And I don't know, what are your thoughts on like that, this volunteering or giving back as like a way to kind of find your purpose or your place?
I think that's exactly right. And think about, so that cleanup that you did, where you spent like a day or, a morning or an afternoon or whatever the grand total number of hours spent were doing something that those people could not do themselves, right? They were not physically able to clean up their yards, and you can imagine that every day they're walking in their front door, looking around, saying, "My yard is a disaster, and there's nothing I can do about it. I cannot afford to pay someone to come clean up my yard, so I guess I just deal with it." And then someone comes in with a team, it swarms their yard and cleans it up, spends however many hours it took to make it look amazing, and just what that did for that person. And then you got to meet them, right? And you got to know them a little bit. And then you got to see firsthand the impact that you dedicating your morning or afternoon or day to help and do some yard cleanup for someone else, how that impacted them in a much greater way. Like, I'm guessing maybe it impacted you because you got to meet this person, you got to be inspired by somebody. But for them, and just the amount of joy and relief and just thankfulness they had to see all these people come and do something super nice for them. That's world changing on a very small scale, but just add that up and keep doing that, and you're really changing people's lives and making their lives better. So I think, absolutely doing these volunteer jobs can help you kind of learn what your purpose is and what your passion is. So, for example, our family, I guess the piece of the story I haven't told yet is that so my stepdaughter also beat neuroblastoma. We met in New York City at the Ronald McDonald House. She was a great buddy of Eli. And so she had the same kind of cancer as Eli. They were both going through treatment together at the Ronald McDonald House. And so now she's in 8th grade. Name's Dakota. She's doing great. She's been off treatment now for 5 years. And so for us, for our family, everything that we do for Beat Cancer, it truly is just a family passion. And so it is, if we're going somewhere to do table sales or, sell Beat Cancer shirts at a farmer's market or a fundraising event or a volleyball tournament or something like that, we're just doing that as a family. We're spending time together as a family, and it's something that we're all passionate about. So we still get to do the hanging out with family stuff, but we're just doing it around something that we're all passionate about and having fun selling t-shirts to people and raising money, right? And so there's ways that you can infuse family time into volunteering. It's obviously a great life lesson for your kids if you have kids, to say, hey, we're going to do something for somebody else today. And so even just Dakota's now like volunteering in the kids room at church on Sunday morning, like taking care of little kids and things like that, which is super important so that, the parents can enjoy service and things like that. So I think it's a really good lesson that you can pass along to your friends and family too, of, hey, we're just going to do something for somebody else today and reap the benefits of knowing that we did something really great.
Yeah, that was really well said. I don't even know what to add to that. But I feel like I was listening to something recently, and it said something along the lines of like, instead of, when people think like, well, I'm having a bad day, so I'm just going to treat myself. I'm going to take myself out. And this person, I think some podcast or something I was listening to, they said, instead of taking yourself out, why don't you go do something nice for someone else? Because you won't just have like that, oh, I bought myself a nice meal, I got, pedicure, whatever. I don't know. I've never gotten one, so I've heard good things though. So instead of that, like doing something for someone else, and it has like much larger, much longer lasting impact on yourself and for another person. So I know we're kind of running out of time here, but just to wrap everything up, what message would you like to leave the audience with, and maybe like a call to action for them to volunteer for some of the stuff you guys are doing?
Yeah, cool. Certainly volunteer. So I get asked quite a bit about specifically Beat Cancer. How can we volunteer to do something with Beat Cancer? And honestly, actually those opportunities are somewhat limited in the fact that, we sell t-shirts and they're all in my basement. And when someone buys one online at beatcancertoday.org, I walk down, I pick up the shirt, I stick it in a bag and put it in the mail. And, so as far as volunteer opportunities, I would, especially if they are willing to enter the world of pediatric cancer, and they would like to volunteer, with kids and families that are fighting cancer, then, certainly the children's hospitals around the country, will have great opportunities for doing things maybe with Child Life, or you could volunteer your time with that, or other just, local, patient and family support, organizations in your area that you could volunteer with. Certainly the Ronald McDonald House, for example, is a great place that you could go in and honestly just play with kids or help serve meals or, whatever. But that's specifically around childhood cancer. But like we said, going online and finding something that you're passionate about, and volunteering is really important for Beat Cancer. Every year we do a silent auction fundraiser. So sometimes I'll put out a call for anybody who want to donate something to our silent auction. But even just running that event, it's, 5 or 6 people. It's not like I need hordes of people to volunteer to do those kind of things. So I would, I guess, just encourage people to reach out to a local organization that is doing something that you're passionate about, and volunteer with them. And from our perspective, if you want to order a Beat Cancer shirt, that's great. You can do that on our website. And then also, we take regular donations specifically for the scholarship funds that we're doing. So I didn't mention this, but from 2009 to 2018, I don't have the 2019 numbers in there yet, we've raised over $370,000 for those organizations that we support. And just this year alone, we gave out $22,500 in scholarships to kids. So, obviously, whenever we get these donations, we get people that we actually have groups that'll go out and do a golf fundraiser. They do all the work, and then they send us the check of the proceeds, which to me is mind-blowing and amazing, because we didn't have to personally do all the work that it takes to run something like a golf fundraiser, which, by the way, is a lot of work. And so to have those volunteers get together, do that, and then know that when they send Beat Cancer the check, that we're going to send that right back out to these organizations that we support that kind of cover the gamut of family and patient support programs all the way to research. I think that's huge. So anybody who wants to do something like that and do a little fundraiser, that's also appreciated. But again, find something that you're passionate about, jump online, or just talk to people in your, in your circle to say, what do you do for volunteer stuff? Because I think that's one of the other fun things too, is do it with a friend, like you mentioned, doing something for somebody else and doing that whether it's with your family or just one more excuse to hang out with your buddy, and you can both go and do something good for somebody else. I think is a really cool thing.
Yeah, I agree. I think that getting out and volunteering is really important. So Aaron, I really appreciate you taking the time to stop by and chat with me today. It's been insightful, and now I'm like questioning, like, man, what else could I be doing to help give back? And if you check out the show notes, take a look at some of the links that we throw in. Maybe we'll throw in some volunteer opportunities through like Volunteer Match. If you want to check out like a Beat Cancer shirt or hoodie, something like that, there'll be links there to check those out. So I really appreciate you guys taking the time to listen to Aaron and I have this conversation, and I look forward to you tuning in next time.
Thanks to all of you for tuning into this episode. If I could ask you for a quick 5-minute favor, Please head over to your podcast player of choice and leave us a review. We would really appreciate it.